It was the spring of 2011, and I was getting ready to enter the real world. I had recently graduated from college and moved to Paris to start my first job. My dream was to become a war correspondent, but the real world that I found took me into a really different kind of conflict zone. At 22 years old, I was diagnosed with leukemia. Overnight, I lost my job, my apartment, my independence. And I became patient number 5624. Since it was unlikely that I'd ever get better, I had to accept my new reality. I became fluent in medicalese, made friends with a group of other young cancer patients, built a vast collection of neon wigs, and learned how to use my rolling ivy pole as a skateboard. I even achieved my dream of becoming a war correspondent, although not in the way I'd expected. It started with a blog reporting from the front lines of my hospital bed, and it morphed into a column I wrote for the New York Times called Life Interrupted. But above all else, my focus was on surviving. And I did survive. Jamie Cannon, a trauma psychologist, explains that grief is not something that heals with time. It's a process to rediscover and redefine one's true self. This can be a difficult thought for many of them, because far too often, after experiencing a traumatic experience, we pine for the way things used to be. This expectation is sometimes impossible, and more often than not, painful, because experiences change people, and we can't obsess over the past. In order to truly heal, we need to acknowledge that we don't move on from grief. We move forward with it. What Almost Dying Taught Me About Living, a 2019 TED Talk by Salika Jawad. Thanks to an army of supportive humans, I'm not just still here, I am cured of my cancer. The truth is that for me, the hardest part of my cancer experience began once the cancer was gone. On paper, of course, I was better. I didn't have leukemia. My blood counts are back to normal. And the disability checks soon stopped coming. To the outside world, I clearly didn't belong to the kingdom of the sick anymore. But in reality, I never felt farther from being well. All that chemo had taken a permanent physical toll on my body. And then there were the invisible, psychological imprints my illness had left behind. The fears of relapse, the unprocessed grief, the demons of PTSD that descended upon me for days, sometimes weeks. No one had warned me of the challenges of reentry. I thought something must be wrong with me. Ashamed and with great guilt, I kept reminding myself of how lucky I was to even be alive. When so many people, like my friend Melissa, were not. But on most days, I woke up feeling so sad and lost. I could barely breathe. Sometimes I even fantasize about getting sick again. And let me tell you, there are so many better things to fantasize about when you're in your 20s and recently single. When I was sick, I vowed that if I survived, it had to be for something. But once I was cured, the question became, how? I was 27 years old, with no job, no partner, and no structure. And this time, I didn't have treatment protocols or discharge instructions to help guide my way forward. But what I did have was an inbox full of messages from strangers, Over the years, people from all over the world had read my column, and they'd responded with letters, comments, and emails. I heard from an inmate on death row by the name Quinn. He'd never been sick a day in his life, but he related to what I described in one column as my incarceration and the feeling of being confined in a tiny fluorescent room. I know that our situations are different, he wrote to me, but the threat of death lurks in both of our shadows. In those lonely first weeks and months of my recovery, these strangers and their words became lifelines, all showing me the same thing. You can be held hostage by the worst thing that's ever happened to you and allowed to hijack your remaining days. Or you can find a way forward. And so I decided to go on a real journey. Not a BS cancer one, that mythical hero's journey that everyone thought I should be on. But a real, pack your bags kind of journey. I put everything I owned into storage, rented out my apartment, borrowed a car, and convinced a very dear, but somewhat smelly, friend into joining me. Together, my dog, Oscar, and I embarked on a 15,000-mile road trip around the United States. I went to Texas and visited Quinn on death row. He asked me what I did to pass all the time I'd spent in a hospital room. When I told him that I got really, really good at playing Scrabble, he said, "Me too." He explained how, even though he spends most of his days in solitary confinement, he and his neighboring prisoners make board games out of paper and call out their plays to the wheel slots. Testament to the incredible tenacity of the human spirit and our ability to adapt with creativity. But the most important thing that I learned on that road trip is that the border between the sick and the healthy, it doesn't exist. The border is porous. As we live longer and longer, surviving illnesses and injuries that would have killed our grandparents, even our parents, the vast majority of us will travel back and forth between these realms, spending much of our lives somewhere in between the two. These are the terms of our existence. Now, I wish that I could say, since coming back from my road trip, I feel fully healed. I don't. But once I stopped expecting myself to return to the person I'd been pre-diagnosis, once I started accepting my body and its limitations, I did start to feel better. And in the end, I think that's the trick. To stop seeing our health as binary, between sick and healthy, well and unwell, whole and broken. To stop thinking that there's some perfect, beautiful state of wellness to strive for, and to quit living in a constant state of dissatisfaction until we reach it. Every single one of us will have our lives interrupted, whether by the ripcord of a diagnosis or some other heartbreak or trauma that brings us to the floor. We need to learn how to live in the in-between place, managing whatever body and mind we currently have. Sometimes all it takes is the ingenuity of a handmade game scrap, finding that stripped down kind of meaning of love of family and a night on the ballroom dance, or that radical dangerous hope that I'm guessing will someday lead a girl terrified of bugs to go camping. If you're able to do that, then you've taken the real hero's journey. You've achieved what it means to actually be well, which is to say, alive in the messiest, most rich sense